I am an employment lawyer in Seattle, Washington, and I help my clients sue their employers. So I've dealt with many employment lawsuits. And the thing about employment lawsuits, like all lawsuits, is that the outcome is never certain. Sometimes you win, and sometimes you lose. In this video, I'm going to share my top 3 reasons why some people lose their employment lawsuits. So stick around. Before I begin, nothing in this video is legal advice. Talk to a lawyer about your specific situation to get legal advice. I'm going to start off with the biggest and most common reason. This is my number 1 reason why some people lose employment lawsuits. And the reason is lying. Believe it or not, employment lawsuits are very difficult to win. The burden of proof falls largely on the employee bringing the lawsuit. That means that the employee has to prove everything. And not only that, the employee will also have to disprove whatever the employer uses as a defense. So to win your case, your lawyer will need to carefully plan a strategy. And to do that, they need to know everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything. Every case has good facts and bad facts. Your lawyer needs to know both the good and the bad. Now, obviously, good facts in your case will help you win. So most people will be very forthright about the good facts, but the bad facts are equally important. And this is where some people fall into the trap. They either don't tell their lawyer about the bad facts or they lie about the bad facts altogether. Either way is a recipe for disaster. You see, your lawyer needs to know the bad facts early on so that they can get ahead of it by structuring your complaint differently, asking for certain communications and documents and discovery, and deposing certain people and not others. Because if your lawyer does not know about the bad facts until you are deep into the litigation process, it can actually be too late to do anything about it, and that will tank your case. So tell your lawyer about everything, even the things you don't want to tell them. My number 2 reason for why some people lose their employment case is history of poor performance. And to understand this one, you need to know a little bit about how employment lawsuits work. So for most employment lawsuits, courts use this thing called the burden shifting analysis. And that just means that the requirement to prove something switches between the parties. So first, the employee has the requirement to prove that they were discriminated against or retaliated or wrongfully terminated or whatever the claim is. And then it switches over to the employer, who will have the opportunity to prove some non-discriminatory reason for doing whatever it did to the employee. And if the employer can successfully prove its non-discriminatory reason, well, then the employee loses the case. So basically what all of that boils down to is if the employer can prove that you were a crummy employee, you lose your case. So obviously, employers will claim this in every case. They will claim that the employee was a terrible worker, always late, always getting in trouble, had rude outbursts, and on and on and on. And if they're lying about it, your lawyer will have no problem disproving their lies. But if they have evidence to show that you were in fact a crummy employee, that can tank your case. Let's use an example. Say John Doe brings a claim of wrongful termination, but his employer shows that John received 2 negative performance reviews over the past year, received a disciplinary write-up for getting in a fight with a coworker, and showed up late to work 5 times, as evidenced by his time cards. Well, in that case, John is probably going to lose his case because the employer has so much evidence showing that he was a bad employee and that they had a legitimate reason to terminate him. My third and final reason why some people lose their employment lawsuits is the timing of events. You see, some claims like retaliation and wrongful termination come down to the timing of events. To understand more about that, watch my videos on retaliation and wrongful termination. I'll put links to those videos in the description, but I'll briefly go over the timing issue right now too. So to win cases like retaliation claims, the employee needs to show 2 things. First, that they engaged in a protected activity. And second, that their employer took an adverse action against them because of it. So the sequence of events is going to be very important in claims like these because the employee has to show that they engaged in this protected activity first, and that only after they engaged in that protected activity did the employer decide to take the adverse action against them. So if the sequence of events works out, these cases are very easy to prove. But sometimes the sequence of events will undermine the claim altogether because sometimes the employer will have evidence that it was planning the adverse action way before the employee engaged in this protected activity. Let me give you an example. Say Jane Doe feels like her managers are treating her differently because she's a woman. So she writes a complaint to her company's HR department. And the next week, the company fires Jane. On its surface, this looks like an obvious case of retaliation because Jane engaged in protected activity when she sent that HR complaint, and the employer terminated her right after. But in this case, unbeknownst to Jane or her lawyers, the company had been dealing with financial difficulties and had decided to lay off Jane's whole department a month before Jane made her complaint. Well, in that case, if the company can prove with evidence that it was planning on laying off Jane along with the rest of her department a month before she submitted her complaint to HR, then Jane is probably going to lose her lawsuit because the company could not have been motivated by Jane's complaint before she made the complaint. So there you have it. Now you know the top 3 reasons why some people lose their employment lawsuits. The first and most common reason is lying. Do not lie to your lawyer. They need to know everything, good and bad. The second reason is poor performance. If your employer can prove that you are a crummy employee, that can tank your case. And the third and final reason is timing. If your employer can prove that it made its decision to fire you before you engage in any protected activity, it will be hard to prove that the employer was motivated by your protected activity, and that can tank your case too. Now, if you like this video, hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to my channel. I make videos about the laws that protect workers. The more we hold employers accountable, the more we protect other workers. That's all for me this week. See you next time.